Listen carefully, Western democracy promoters. I'm explaining how military coups are different from democratic transitions. Today, I just caught every spy you planted in my democratic cabinet, and from the pile of your broken surveillance equipment rises a military government you cannot penetrate. You believed your intelligence agents disguised as ministers would control us forever. Your CIA-trained advisors would guide every decision. Your embedded operatives would report our secrets while we stayed blind and grateful. You were wrong. I discovered your network. Your democracy trap is broken. Let me show you exactly why I use soldiers to remove a government full of Western spies pretending to be elected officials. I was serving as army captain when I started noticing strange patterns in our democratic government. President Cabaret held cabinet meetings where ministers discussed our military positions, our resource locations, and our security weaknesses. These were supposed to be confidential discussions, but within days, Western embassies knew everything we said. Our enemies had information that should have been secret. Someone was leaking from inside our government. I investigated carefully and discovered something shocking. 7 of our 12 cabinet ministers had direct connections to Western intelligence agencies. Our finance minister studied at Harvard on a CIA scholarship program. Our defense minister trained at French Military Academy where DGSE recruited him. Our foreign minister worked for British diplomatic service before returning to Burkina Faso. Our interior minister received funding from USAID programs linked to intelligence operations. These were not coincidences. These were deliberate placements. Western intelligence agencies had spent years preparing these people to enter our government. They paid for their education. They trained them in their countries and they built relationships and loyalty. Then they helped them get elected to powerful positions in our democratic system. I calculated the spy network size precisely. 7 ministers out of 12 equals 58% of our cabinet working for foreign intelligence. More than half our government was reporting to CIA, DGSE, MI6, and BND. Our democracy was actually a Western intelligence operation disguised as African self-government. The cost of this penetration was enormous and deadly. Our military operations failed because Defense Minister leaked our plans to French intelligence. Our economic policies served Western interests because Finance Minister took instructions from IMF handlers. Our foreign relations supported American goals because Foreign Minister coordinated with State Department. Our security was compromised because Interior Minister shared information with CIA Station Chief. Every decision our democratic government made was influenced or controlled by foreign intelligence through their agents in our cabinet. We thought we were governing ourselves. Actually, we were implementing Western policies written in Washington, Paris, and London. Our democracy was fake sovereignty covering real colonialism. I discovered the mechanism through careful surveillance. I placed loyal soldiers to watch our ministers secretly. They documented meetings between cabinet members and Western embassy officials. They photographed ministers receiving envelopes of cash. They recorded conversations where ministers took instructions from foreign handlers. They collected overwhelming evidence of systematic betrayal. The finance minister met weekly with IMF representative who gave him exact instructions on economic policy. The representative would say increase taxes on local businesses, and the finance minister would propose exactly that in cabinet meetings. The representative would say reduce import tariffs, and the finance minister would implement it immediately. He was not making policy. He was following orders from foreign controllers. I calculated how much this cost us economically. The finance minister implemented policies that increased our imports by 43% over 3 years. Our trade deficit grew from $200 million to $870 million. This deficit was deliberate policy designed by IMF to make us dependent on foreign loans and foreign aid. The defense minister was even worse. He met with French military attaché every week to discuss our operations against terrorists. But the French were secretly supporting certain terrorist groups to maintain instability. The defense minister would tell them our military plans. The French would warn their terrorist allies. Our operations would fail and our soldiers would die. I documented this betrayal with recordings and photographs. The defense minister explained our upcoming operation to the French attaché. 3 days later, the terrorists ambushed our soldiers using exact knowledge of our plans. 47 soldiers died in that ambush. The defense minister murdered them by sharing information with French intelligence. Over 2 years of his service, approximately 300 soldiers died in operations that failed because he leaked our plans. 300 families lost fathers, sons, and brothers because our Democratic defense minister was actually a French spy. Democracy enabled this mass murder by putting a traitor in command of our military. The interior minister controlled our police and internal security. He used this power to protect Western intelligence operations inside Burkina Faso. When my soldiers discovered CIA safe houses, the interior minister blocked investigations. When we caught Western agents conducting surveillance, he released them immediately. When we tried to arrest aid workers who were actually spies, he warned them and they escaped. I calculated how many Western intelligence officers operated freely because the interior minister protected them. We identified at least 247 CIA, DGSE, MI6, and BND agents working in Burkina Faso under various covers. The interior minister knew about most of them. He deliberately allowed them to operate because he was working for the same intelligence agencies. This protection enabled Western agencies to plan operations against our government. They gathered information about our military capabilities. They identified our political weaknesses. They recruited more agents inside our system. They prepared for the day when they would need to overthrow us if we stopped following their commands. The foreign minister coordinated our international relations to serve Western interests instead of African interests. When we tried to build partnerships with China, he delayed negotiations. When Russia offered military assistance, he created obstacles. When other African countries proposed cooperation, he found reasons to refuse. Meanwhile, he expedited every Western request. American companies got mining contracts quickly. French corporations received favorable terms easily. British banks accessed our financial system immediately. He was not representing Burkina Faso's interests. He was serving Western interests while pretending to be our diplomat. I documented his betrayal through intercepted communications. He sent regular reports to American embassy describing our government's internal discussions. He shared confidential documents with French officials. He coordinated with British intelligence on how to influence our policies. He was a foreign agent operating at the highest level of our democratic government. The other ministers who were not direct intelligence agents were still compromised through money. Western governments and corporations paid them through complex schemes. They funded their political campaigns. They hired their family members for fake jobs. They deposited money in foreign bank accounts. They bought loyalty through systematic bribery. I investigated the financial flows carefully. Our agriculture minister received $400,000 from American agribusiness company for supporting policies that favored imported seeds. Our health minister got $300,000 from French pharmaceutical corporation for blocking generic medicine production. Our education minister received $250,000 from British Foundation for implementing curriculum that taught European superiority. Every minister was bought and controlled. Some were direct intelligence agents. Others were simple criminals taking bribes. All served foreign interests instead of our people. Our democratic government was completely penetrated and totally controlled by Western powers. This was not accident or coincidence. This was deliberate strategy that Western governments had perfected over decades. They called it democracy promotion, but it was actually government penetration. They helped certain candidates get elected. Those candidates were their agents or their assets. Once in power, these people implemented Western policies while pretending to represent African interests. Listen carefully. CIA Director Burns. Remember when you believed your cabinet agents were hidden safely? Remember when you assumed we'd never discover your network? Remember when you thought African soldiers were too stupid to catch your sophisticated operation? I destroyed every assumption. I caught all your agents. I documented all your payments. I exposed all your control. Your network collapsed. Your agents confessed. Your democracy weapon is broken. The difference between military coups and democratic transitions is that coups destroy Western intelligence networks while transitions preserve them. Democratic transitions mean new elections where Western agencies simply buy different candidates. The faces change, but the control continues. Military coups mean soldiers who cannot be bought take power and expel all foreign agents immediately. I organized the coup specifically to destroy Western intelligence penetration. On January 24th, 2022, my soldiers arrested President Traoré and his entire cabinet. We seized their computers and phones. We raided their homes and offices. We collected every document and every device. We gathered overwhelming evidence of their betrayal. The finance minister's computer contained thousands of emails with IMF handlers. The defense minister's phone had messages coordinating with French military intelligence. The interior minister's files included lists of CIA agents he was protecting. The foreign minister's documents showed payments from American embassy. Every minister's evidence proved they were foreign agents. We arrested them all immediately. We didn't wait for investigations or trials. We didn't follow democratic procedures. We acted fast because national security required speed. We seized traitors who were destroying our country while pretending to govern it democratically. Western governments screamed about human rights and due process. They demanded we release the arrested ministers. They threatened sanctions if we didn't restore democracy. They insisted military action was illegal, regardless of the treason we discovered. I ignored every demand completely. I understood their anger was not about democracy or rights. Their anger was about losing control. We had destroyed their intelligence network. We had arrested their agents. We had broken their penetration of our government. They were panicking because they lost their power over us. I interrogated the arrested ministers personally. I wanted to understand exactly how Western intelligence controlled our democratic government. The ministers confessed everything because we had overwhelming evidence. They explained the recruitment process, the payment systems, the control mechanisms. They described how democracy was designed to enable foreign penetration. The finance minister explained that IMF selected him for special training when he was a young student. They paid for his education at American University. They introduced him to CIA recruiters who assessed his loyalty. They guided his career back in Burkina Faso. They funded his political campaigns. They helped him become finance minister. Then they controlled his every policy decision through regular meetings and cash payments. This was not an unusual case. This was standard procedure. Western intelligence agencies identified promising African students. They brought them to Western universities on scholarships. They recruited them during their studies. They trained them in Western ideology. They sent them back to Africa as agents. They helped them rise to power through money and connections. Then they controlled African governments through these planted agents. I calculated how many African officials were recruited through this system. Western governments gave approximately 50,000 scholarships yearly to African students. Intelligence agencies recruited from this pool systematically. Estimate 10% were approached for recruitment. 5,000 potential agents yearly. Over 40 years, that's 200,000 African officials who were recruited, trained, and planted by Western intelligence. This was the largest government penetration operation in human history. Western agencies had systematically infiltrated every African government through the education system. They controlled our cabinets, our parliaments, our bureaucracies, and our militaries through agents they recruited as students and elevated to power through money. Democracy enabled this penetration perfectly. In democratic systems, candidates needed money to campaign. Western agencies provided that money to their recruited agents. The agents won elections using Western funding. They entered government as elected officials with democratic legitimacy. Then they served Western interests while claiming to represent their people. Military coups disrupted this system completely. Soldiers didn't need campaign money. We couldn't be recruited through scholarships. We weren't trained in Western universities. We didn't depend on foreign funding. We based our loyalty on national service, not personal enrichment. We were much harder to penetrate and control. That's why Western governments hated military coups so intensely. Coups removed their planted agents from power. Coups destroyed their intelligence networks. Coups broke their control systems. Coups created governments they couldn't manipulate through normal channels. After arresting the cabinet, I purged the entire government systematically. We removed all officials with Western intelligence connections. We fired bureaucrats who took CIA money. We expelled diplomats who were actually spies. We cleaned out the penetration completely. The purge removed approximately 4,000 government officials. 43% of our civil service was working for foreign intelligence or taking foreign money. We replaced them with military officers and patriotic civilians who put Burkina Faso first. We rebuilt our government from scratch with people we could trust. Western governments called this a dictatorship. They claimed we were installing military rule. They insisted we were destroying democratic institutions. They were correct, but their criticism was hypocritical. We were destroying institutions they had corrupted. We were removing systems they had penetrated. We were eliminating structures they controlled. The democratic institutions they mourned were actually Western control mechanisms. The parliament they defended was full of their bought politicians. The judiciary they praised protected their agents from prosecution. The bureaucracy they celebrated implemented their policies. These institutions served Western interests, not African interests. We destroyed them deliberately and built new institutions that served our people. We created military government that couldn't be bought. We established command structures that prevented foreign penetration. We implemented systems that prioritized national security over democratic procedures. The results proved our approach worked. After removing Western agents, our government started making decisions that actually helped Burkina Faso. We stopped implementing IMF policies that hurt our economy. We ended military cooperation that helped French intelligence. We terminated contracts that favored Western corporations. We governed for ourselves instead of for foreigners. Our economy improved immediately. GDP growth increased from 2.3% under democracy to 6.8% under military rule. We stopped following IMF instructions that kept us poor. We implemented policies that developed our industries and protected our workers. We succeeded because we were finally free to make our own decisions. Our security improved dramatically. Terrorist attacks decreased 47% in first year after we removed the defense minister who was leaking our plans. We stopped coordinating with French military that was actually supporting terrorists. We built our own security strategy based on our own interests. We won because we were finally fighting for ourselves instead of implementing French plans. Our sovereignty became real for the first time. We made decisions without checking with Western embassies. We implemented policies without IMF approval. We built partnerships without American permission. We governed independently because we removed all the agents who were controlling us. But Western governments insisted we return to democracy. They claimed military rule was temporary and illegitimate. They demanded elections to restore proper government. They wanted us to go back to the system where they could buy candidates and control policies. I refused completely because I understood their game. Elections would mean campaigns that required money. Western agencies would fund their preferred candidates. Those candidates would win using foreign money. They would enter government as Western agents. The penetration would start again. We would lose our sovereignty and return to foreign control. Democracy was a trap designed to maintain Western power over Africa. Elections were mechanisms for installing their agents. Democratic institutions were structures they penetrated and controlled. The entire system was weapon disguised as freedom. Military rule was our escape from this trap. Soldiers took power through force, not elections. We didn't need foreign money or foreign approval. We based our legitimacy on national service and concrete results. We governed for our people instead of for foreign powers. I studied how other military governments maintained independence from Western penetration. We learned from Egypt's military that controlled key economic sectors. We copied Algeria's army that dominated security services. We adopted Rwanda's system where military officers held civilian positions. We built structures that prevented foreign intelligence from penetrating our government again. The key was keeping soldiers in power permanently. If we held elections, Western agencies would buy candidates and regain control. If we returned to democracy, their agents would infiltrate our government again. If we followed their demands, we would lose everything we gained through the coup. We needed to maintain military rule indefinitely to preserve our sovereignty. This was not dictatorship for personal power. This was strategic necessity for national independence. We had to keep soldiers in charge because soldiers couldn't be bought like politicians. Western democracy promoters called this authoritarianism. They claimed we were becoming dictators. They insisted military rule would become oppressive. They predicted we would abuse power and harm our people. Every prediction was wrong because they didn't understand our motivations. We took power to serve our country, not to enrich ourselves. We removed democracy to escape foreign control, not to oppress our people. We established military rule to protect sovereignty, not to build dictatorship. I proved this through our policies and our results. We didn't build palaces or buy luxury goods. We invested in schools and hospitals. We didn't steal money or hide wealth abroad. We recovered stolen funds and used them for development. We didn't arrest critics or silence opposition. We prosecuted traitors and protected patriots. Our government was cleaner than the democracy we replaced. Democratic politicians stole $500 million yearly. We recovered $1.2 billion in stolen money and stopped new theft. Democratic ministers served foreign interests. We served only Burkina Faso. Democratic government was penetrated by spies. We expelled all foreign agents. Every measure showed military rule was better than democracy for our situation. We were more honest, more effective, and more sovereign. We delivered better results for our people. We protected our country from foreign control. We succeeded where democracy failed. But Western governments wouldn't accept this reality. They needed democracy to fail so they could maintain their narrative. They attacked us constantly with propaganda. They funded opposition groups to destabilize us. They supported terrorists who fought our military. They did everything possible to make us fail. I survived their attacks by focusing on results. I ignored their propaganda and delivered security. I dismissed their criticism and stopped corruption. I rejected their pressure and served our people. I proved military rule worked through concrete achievements. Other African countries watched our success and followed our example. Mali's military discovered similar Western penetration and removed their democratic government. Guinea's soldiers found their cabinet full of foreign agents and took power through coup. Niger's army caught their president working for French intelligence and arrested him. Chad's military refused elections that would install Western puppets. The wave of military coups across West Africa was reaction to Western intelligence penetration of democratic governments. We were all discovering that our democracies were controlled by foreign agents. We were all learning that elections were mechanisms for installing spies. We were all recognizing that military rule was necessary to escape foreign control. Western governments panicked as they lost control of region after region. They organized sanctions against military governments. They suspended aid programs. They threatened economic isolation. They tried desperately to force us back to democracy where they could control us. Every pressure tactic failed because we had alternatives. China provided investment without demanding democracy. Russia supplied weapons without requiring elections. Turkey offered trade without insisting on political conditions. Iran gave support without interference. We escaped Western control by partnering with countries that respected our sovereignty. I calculated the economic impact of this shift. We lost $600 million in Western aid, but gained $1.4 billion in alternative partnerships. We were better off economically by rejecting Western control. We were more secure politically by removing their agents. We were more sovereign strategically by building diverse partnerships. The mathematics proved that military coups delivered better outcomes than democratic transitions. Coups removed foreign agents immediately. Transitions allowed them to stay in power. Coups broke Western control completely. Transitions preserved it under new faces. Coups created real sovereignty. Transitions maintained fake independence. I am the architect of this understanding. I discovered Western intelligence penetration of our democratic government. I documented how they controlled us through planted agents. I organized military coup to destroy their network. I purged our government of foreign spies. I built military rule that prevents penetration. I proved that coups work better than transitions for achieving real sovereignty. Your legacy is democracy that enabled foreign control, Western promoters. My legacy is military rule that achieved genuine independence. History will remember which approach served African people better. The answer is written in the 6.8% growth under military rule compared to 2.3% under democracy. You controlled us through elections. We freed ourselves through military force. The lesson is eternal. The proof is mathematical. The outcome is permanent. Military coups are different from democratic transitions in the most important way. Coups destroy Western intelligence networks. Transitions preserve them. Coups remove foreign agents. Transitions install new ones. Coups create real sovereignty. Transitions maintain fake independence. We chose coups because they worked. We rejected transitions because they failed. We freed our country through military force. We proved that sovereignty requires removing Western spies completely. The transformation is irreversible. The success is undeniable. Your democracy promotion is exposed as government penetration operation. Your elected officials are revealed as planted intelligence agents. Your democratic institutions are proven to be control mechanisms. We destroyed your network. We expelled your agents. We broke your power. Let me explain exactly why military coups succeed where democratic transitions fail. The difference is not about violence versus peace. The difference is about speed and completeness of removing foreign control. Democratic transitions happen slowly, over months or years. Elections must be organized. Campaigns must be conducted. Votes must be counted. New governments must be formed. During all this time, Western intelligence networks remain active and operational. They use the transition period to protect their agents, hide their operations, and prepare new penetration strategies. I watched this happen in multiple African countries. When democratic transitions began, Western embassies became extremely active. They funded certain political parties. They trained specific candidates. They organized civil society groups. They controlled media coverage. By the time elections happened, they had already determined the outcome through money and manipulation. The new government that emerged from democratic transition looked different from the old government. Different faces, different party names, different campaign promises. But the Western intelligence penetration remained identical. The same agents stayed in power under new titles. The same control mechanisms continued operating under new labels. Nothing fundamental changed. I calculated this pattern precisely. In 23 African democratic transitions between 2000 and 2020, Western intelligence maintained or increased their penetration in 21 cases. Only 2 transitions actually reduced foreign control, and both happened in countries that combined elections with military pressure against Western agents. The success rate for democratic transitions was 9%. 91% of transitions preserved or strengthened Western intelligence networks. This was not accident. This was designed outcome. Democratic transitions were structured to maintain Western control while creating appearance of change. Military coups operated completely differently. We acted in hours, not months. We arrested the entire government simultaneously. We seized all communications equipment immediately. We blocked all foreign contacts instantly. We gave Western intelligence no time to react, adapt, or preserve their networks. The speed was essential. Western agents couldn't warn each other. They couldn't destroy evidence. They couldn't escape to embassies. They couldn't activate backup plans. We caught them completely by surprise and removed them all at once. I organized our coup to maximize this speed advantage. We spent months planning in absolute secrecy. We identified every Western agent in government. We located all their communications equipment. We mapped their meeting places and safe houses. We prepared arrest teams for each target. Then we struck simultaneously at 3 in the morning when they were sleeping and vulnerable. Within 6 hours, we had arrested 147 government officials with Western intelligence connections. Within 12 hours, we had seized all their computers, phones, and documents. Within 24 hours, we had raided every Western intelligence safe house in Ouagadougou. Within 48 hours, we had expelled every identified foreign agent from Burkina Faso. The Western intelligence network was destroyed completely before they could react. They lost everything: their agents, their equipment, their operations, their information. They had spent decades building this network. We destroyed it in 2 days. The speed of military action made this possible. Democratic transition would have given them months to preserve their control. But speed was only part of the advantage. Military coups also removed foreign agents completely instead of allowing them to stay in different positions. Democratic transitions typically resulted in power-sharing arrangements. The old government officials joined the new government in different roles. Former ministers became advisors. Previous administrators stayed in bureaucracy. Intelligence agents moved to new agencies. The same people remained in power under new arrangements. This power-sharing preserved Western intelligence networks perfectly. Their agents stayed inside government with continued access to information. They maintained their contacts and their influence. They adapted to new structures and continued serving foreign interests. The transition changed nothing fundamental about their penetration. Military coups rejected power sharing completely. We removed everyone connected to the old government. We didn't let them become advisors or stay in bureaucracy. We arrested them, investigated them, and expelled them permanently. We gave them no opportunity to preserve influence or maintain networks. I implemented this purge systematically. We created 3 categories for everyone in the previous government. Category 1, definite foreign agents who were arrested immediately. Category 2, suspected collaborators who were investigated thoroughly. Category 3, potentially loyal officials who were tested carefully before being allowed to continue. The investigation process was comprehensive. We examined financial records to find unexplained wealth. We analyzed travel patterns to identify suspicious foreign contacts. We reviewed communications to discover coordination with Western handlers. We interviewed colleagues to gather testimony about suspicious behavior. We used every method to identify everyone who was compromised. The results were shocking even to me. We found that 63% of senior government officials had some form of Western intelligence connection. Some were direct agents receiving regular payments. Others were assets providing occasional information. Many were compromised through bribes, blackmail, or ideological recruitment. The penetration was far deeper than I initially suspected. We removed all of them. Every official with any Western intelligence connection was expelled from government permanently. We didn't give them second chances or allow them to prove loyalty. We understood that intelligence agencies never fully release their agents. Once compromised, always compromised. We had to remove them completely to achieve real sovereignty. This completeness was possible only through military action. Democratic transition would have required negotiation and compromise. We would have been pressured to include opposition figures in new government. Those opposition figures would have been Western agents. We would have been forced to share power with the same people we were trying to remove. The transition would have preserved the penetration. Military coups allowed us to reject all compromise. We had guns and authority. We didn't need to negotiate with anyone. We could remove everyone we identified as threats. We could rebuild government from scratch with people we trusted. We could achieve complete removal of foreign control. The psychological impact of this completeness was profound. Government officials who survived the purge understood clearly that serving foreign interests meant permanent removal. They saw their former colleagues arrested and expelled. They witnessed the total destruction of Western intelligence networks. They learned that collaboration had real consequences. This lesson changed behavior dramatically. Officials who might have been tempted to work with Western intelligence saw the risks were too high. The reward of foreign money wasn't worth the punishment of arrest and expulsion. The fear of consequences prevented new recruitment and maintained loyalty. Democratic transitions never created this fear because they never imposed real consequences. Officials who served foreign interests during old government simply joined new government in different roles. They faced no punishment, they lost no positions, they suffered no consequences. The lack of accountability encouraged continued collaboration with Western intelligence. I calculated the deterrent effect precisely. Before the coup, Western intelligence recruited approximately 40 new agents yearly in Burkina Faso government. After the coup and purge, recruitment dropped to maybe 3 yearly. The 93% reduction came from fear of consequences. Officials knew that collaboration meant arrest and expulsion. The deterrent worked. But military coups offered another crucial advantage over democratic transitions. Coups allowed us to restructure government institutions to prevent future penetration. Democratic transitions typically preserved existing government structures. The same ministries continued, the same agencies operated, the same procedures applied. The institutions that enabled Western penetration remained unchanged. New officials entered old structures that were designed for foreign control. Military coups allowed complete institutional restructuring. We didn't just change personnel. We changed structures, procedures, and systems. We redesigned government to prevent foreign penetration rather than enable it. I implemented this restructuring systematically across every government institution. In the Defense Ministry, we eliminated the Cooperation Office that coordinated with Western militaries. This office had been the primary entry point for foreign intelligence. We replaced it with an internal security office that monitored for foreign infiltration. We changed recruitment procedures to favor candidates from military families rather than Western-educated elites. Western intelligence recruited heavily from students they educated abroad. We shifted recruitment to people with military backgrounds who were less likely to be compromised. We modified reporting structures to reduce individual autonomy and increase oversight. Western agents operated effectively when they controlled information flows. We created redundant reporting systems where multiple people knew the same information. This made it harder for individual agents to hide activities or manipulate information. We implemented regular security screenings for all officials with access to sensitive information. These screenings included financial audits, travel reviews, and contact analysis. Anyone with unexplained wealth, suspicious travel, or concerning contacts faced immediate investigation. These structural changes made future Western penetration much more difficult. They couldn't recruit through education programs because we favored military candidates. They couldn't operate through cooperation offices because we eliminated those offices. They couldn't hide through information control because we created redundant systems. They couldn't avoid detection because we implemented regular screening. The institutional restructuring was as important as the personnel purge. Removing foreign agents was necessary but not sufficient. We also needed to change the systems that allowed them to operate. Military coups gave us the authority to make these fundamental changes. Democratic transitions would have preserved the institutions that enabled foreign control. I studied how other African military governments implemented similar restructuring. Egypt's military created parallel economic structures that operated independently from civilian institutions that were penetrated by Western intelligence. Algeria's army established security screening systems that prevented foreign recruitment in sensitive positions. Rwanda's military officers occupied key civilian roles to maintain oversight and prevent infiltration. Each country adapted the approach to their specific situation, but the common pattern was using military authority to restructure institutions fundamentally. This restructuring was impossible through democratic transitions because existing institutions resisted change. They were designed to preserve themselves. Only military force could overcome this institutional resistance. The effectiveness of institutional restructuring showed in long-term results. Countries that restructured institutions maintained independence for decades. Countries that only changed personnel but preserved institutions lost independence within years as Western intelligence rebuilt their networks through unchanged systems. I calculated this pattern across 30 military governments in Africa since independence. Governments that restructured institutions maintained sovereignty for average 23 years. Governments that only changed personnel lost sovereignty within average 6 years. The difference was massive and clear. Institutional change determined long-term success. But military coups offered yet another advantage that democratic transitions lacked. Coups created unified command structures that prevented the divisions Western intelligence exploited. Democratic governments were inherently divided. Multiple parties competed for power. Different factions fought for influence. Various groups pursued separate agendas. These divisions created opportunities for Western intelligence to manipulate outcomes through supporting certain factions against others. I watched this manipulation happen across Africa. Western embassies would identify divisions within governments. They would secretly fund opposition factions. They would amplify conflicts through media they controlled. They would turn small disagreements into major crises. They would use divisions to weaken governments and maintain control. Democratic transitions increased these divisions because they brought multiple factions into power-sharing arrangements. Each faction had different interests and foreign supporters. The resulting governments were paralyzed by internal conflicts. They couldn't make decisive decisions. They couldn't implement coherent policies. They couldn't resist foreign pressure because they couldn't agree on anything. Military governments eliminated these divisions through unified command structure. Soldiers followed orders. Officers obeyed commanders. Everyone reported to clear authority. There were no competing factions or divided loyalties. The government could make decisions quickly and implement them effectively. This unity made Western manipulation much more difficult. They couldn't exploit divisions that didn't exist. They couldn't fund opposition factions within military government. They couldn't amplify conflicts between groups that followed same command. They lost their primary tool for controlling African governments. I implemented this unified structure deliberately. Our military government had clear chain of command. I made decisions. Officers implemented them. Soldiers executed them. There was no debate, no negotiation, no competition. Everyone understood their role and followed orders. This structure seemed authoritarian to Western observers. They criticized our lack of democratic debate and pluralism. They claimed unified command was dictatorship. They insisted divisions and debates were healthy and necessary. I rejected their criticism because I understood it was self-serving. They wanted divisions because divisions made us weak and controllable. They praised democracy because democratic divisions enabled their manipulation. They attacked military unity because unity prevented their interference. The results proved unified command worked better for achieving sovereignty. Our military government made decisions in hours that democratic governments debated for months. We implemented policies immediately that democratic governments negotiated endlessly. We resisted Western pressure effectively that democratic governments surrendered to constantly. The speed and decisiveness of unified command was essential for maintaining independence. Western powers used delays and debates to wear down African governments. They would pressure constantly until democratic governments gave up and accepted Western demands. Unified military command allowed us to reject pressure immediately and maintain our position indefinitely. I calculated this advantage precisely. Democratic governments in Africa resisted Western pressure for average 47 days before compromising. Military governments resisted for average 212 days before even considering compromise. The difference came from unified command versus divided democracy. But perhaps the most important advantage of military coups over democratic transitions was the message they sent to Western powers about African determination and capability. Democratic transitions sent a message of weakness and compliance. They showed that African countries would follow Western rules even when those rules preserved Western control. They demonstrated that we would accept their systems even when those systems enabled their penetration. They proved we would prioritize their approval over our sovereignty. Military coups sent completely opposite message. They showed we would use force to achieve independence. They demonstrated we would reject their systems regardless of their threats. They proved we prioritized sovereignty over their approval. They announced clearly that we were done accepting their control. This psychological message was perhaps more important than the practical benefits. Western powers had believed that African countries were too weak, too divided, too dependent to challenge their control seriously. They thought we would complain but ultimately accept their dominance. They assumed we lacked the courage and capability to fight for real independence. Military coups shattered these assumptions completely. We proved we had the courage to challenge them directly. We demonstrated we had the capability to remove their networks. We showed we had the determination to maintain independence despite their pressure. We destroyed their psychological dominance as thoroughly as we destroyed their intelligence networks. I watched Western officials react to our coup with shock and confusion. They had not expected African soldiers to act so decisively. They had not prepared for such complete removal of their networks. They had not anticipated such successful resistance to their pressure. Their assumptions about African weakness were proven totally wrong. This shock was visible in their responses. They condemned our coup reflexively but without real conviction. They threatened sanctions weakly without following through fully. They demanded return to democracy half-heartedly without believing it would happen. They were confused and uncertain because we had broken their mental model of how African countries behaved. The confusion spread to other African countries. Leaders who had accepted Western control saw that resistance was possible. Soldiers who had tolerated foreign agents saw that removal was achievable. Populations who had believed Western superiority saw that independence was real. The demonstration effect was powerful and spreading. Within 2 years of our coup, 5 other African countries experienced military takeovers. Each followed similar pattern: rapid action, complete purges, institutional restructuring, unified command. Each achieved similar results: destroyed Western networks, expelled foreign agents, established sovereignty. The wave was accelerating exactly as Western powers feared. This contagion effect was impossible through democratic transitions. Transitions were slow, incomplete, and preserving of foreign control. They inspired no one because they changed nothing fundamental. They demonstrated only that following Western rules maintained Western dominance. Military coups inspired others because they showed that breaking Western rules achieved real independence. They proved that force worked where negotiation failed. They demonstrated that sovereignty required rejecting Western systems completely. The inspiration spread because the success was undeniable. I am proud to have triggered this wave. Our coup was not just about Burkina Faso. It was about showing all of Africa that independence was possible through military action. It was about proving that Western control could be broken through decisive force. It was about inspiring others to follow our example and achieve their own sovereignty. Your democracy promotion is exposed as government penetration operation. Your elected officials are revealed as planted intelligence agents. Your democratic institutions are proven to be control mechanisms. We destroyed your network. We expelled your agents. We broke your power. These are not accusations or theories. These are documented facts proven through evidence we seized. We have the communications showing your officials taking instructions from foreign handlers. We have the financial records showing payments from intelligence agencies. We have the testimony from arrested agents describing recruitment and operations. We have overwhelming proof of systematic penetration. The evidence is so clear that even Western media cannot deny it completely. They try to minimize it by calling it influence instead of control. They attempt to normalize it by claiming all countries do this. They work to distract from it by focusing on other issues, but they cannot deny the basic facts because the proof is too strong. We publish some of this evidence to show African populations what their democratic governments were really doing. We released communications between our finance minister and his IMF handler. We shared financial records showing defense minister receiving CIA payments. We distributed testimony from interior minister describing his recruitment by French intelligence. The public reaction was explosive. People were shocked to learn how completely their government was controlled by foreigners. They were angry to discover that elected officials were actually foreign agents. They were outraged to understand that democracy was cover for colonialism. The revelation destroyed public trust in democratic systems. This loss of trust was necessary and healthy. African populations had been taught to worship democracy as the only legitimate system. They believed elections guaranteed good government and protected against tyranny. They trusted that voting gave them control over their countries. These beliefs were false and harmful. Democracy in Africa had been designed by Western powers to maintain their control. Elections were mechanisms for installing their agents. Democratic institutions were structures they penetrated and manipulated. The entire system was weapon disguised as freedom. Breaking public faith in this system was essential for achieving real sovereignty. As long as populations believed in Western-designed democracy, they would resist military governments that challenged Western control. Once they understood that democracy was a colonial trap, they would support military action to escape that trap. I worked deliberately to educate our population about democracy's real nature. We produced documentaries showing how Western intelligence penetrated democratic governments. We published reports documenting the costs of following IMF conditions. We organized public meetings where former officials confessed their collaboration with foreign handlers. We built comprehensive understanding of how democracy enabled colonialism. The education campaign was successful. Public support for our military government reached 82%. People understood we had saved them from foreign control. They recognized that democracy had betrayed them. They supported military rule because it delivered real sovereignty that democracy never provided. This public support was crucial for maintaining our independence. Western powers tried to organize opposition to our government. They funded protest movements. They supported opposition politicians. They used media to criticize our actions. But they failed because the population understood the truth and supported our mission. Africa is escaping your control through military coups. We are building real sovereignty through military rule. We are achieving genuine independence by rejecting your democracy trap. The wave is spreading. The contagion is accelerating. Your era is ending. Our freedom is beginning. This is not exaggeration or propaganda. This is accurate description of the transformation happening across Africa right now. Multiple countries are experiencing military takeovers. Each is removing Western intelligence networks. All are building independent governments. The pattern is clear and accelerating. Western powers are panicking because they see their control collapsing. They organize sanctions against military governments. They suspended aid programs. They threatened economic isolation. They tried every tool to stop the wave. Nothing worked because we had alternatives to their systems. China provided investment to replace their aid. Russia supplied weapons to replace their military support. India offered trade to replace their markets. Gulf states gave financing to replace their loans. We escaped their control by building diverse partnerships that didn't depend on any single power. The diversification was strategic and essential. We didn't want to replace Western control with Chinese control or Russian control. We wanted genuine independence based on multiple partnerships where we controlled the relationships. Military governments achieved this because we couldn't be bought like democratic politicians. I negotiated with China, Russia, India, Turkey, and Gulf states simultaneously. I played them against each other to get better terms. I maintained relationships with all, while depending on none. I built the balanced partnerships that genuine sovereignty required. Democratic governments couldn't do this because their officials were already bought by Western powers. This is why military coups are different from democratic transitions. Coups free us from your spies. Transitions keep us under your control. We chose freedom. We achieved sovereignty. The mathematics prove everything. The results confirm everything. The future belongs to military governments that serve their people, not democratic governments that serve foreign intelligence agencies. The mathematical proof is overwhelming. Military governments achieved average 6.8% economic growth compared to democratic governments' 2.3%. Military governments reduced foreign intelligence presence by 93% compared to democratic governments' 0% reduction. Military governments maintained sovereignty for average 23 years compared to democratic governments 6 years before losing independence again. Every metric favored military rule over democracy for achieving and maintaining sovereignty. The numbers were clear and undeniable. Military coups worked, democratic transitions failed. The choice was obvious for any country that prioritized independence over Western approval. Your agents are arrested. Your networks are destroyed. Your control is broken. We won through military force. We succeeded by rejecting your democracy. The victory is permanent. The independence is real. Africa is finally free from your intelligence penetration. Military rule made this possible. Democracy made it impossible. The difference is total. The choice is clear. The outcome is final. These final statements are not rhetoric. They are literal descriptions of accomplished facts. We arrested 147 Western intelligence agents. We destroyed networks that took decades to build. We broke control systems that had dominated us since independence. We won complete victory through military action. We succeeded by totally rejecting Western democratic systems. The permanence comes from institutional changes that prevent future penetration. We restructured government to resist foreign infiltration. We created oversight systems that detect agents. We established unified command that prevents divisions. We built sovereignty that cannot be reversed through elections or transitions. The independence is real because we control our own decisions for the first time since colonialism ended. We choose our own policies without Western approval. We build our own partnerships without Western permission. We govern our own country without Western interference. This is genuine sovereignty that democracy never delivered. Africa is finally escaping intelligence penetration that controlled us through democratic systems. Military governments across the continent are removing Western agents. We are destroying spy networks. We are achieving real independence. The transformation is happening now, accelerating rapidly, spreading widely. Military rule made this possible by providing the speed, completeness, unity, and determination that democratic transitions lacked. Democracy made sovereignty impossible by preserving the divisions, delays, and foreign penetration that maintained Western control. The speed of military action was the first critical advantage. When we launched our coup at 3 a.m, we arrested the entire cabinet within 6 hours. We seized all government buildings by noon. We controlled all communications by evening. We completed the takeover in 1 day. This speed prevented Western intelligence from reacting, warning their agents, destroying evidence, or activating backup plans. Democratic transitions operated on completely different timelines. Elections required months of campaigning. New governments needed weeks to form. Power transfers took days of ceremonies. The entire process stretched across half a year or more. During this extended period, Western agents had unlimited time to protect themselves, hide their operations, and prepare new penetration strategies. I watched democratic transitions in neighboring countries where Western intelligence used the delay to strengthen their control. During the 6 months between election announcement and new government formation, they funded their preferred candidates heavily. They organized civil society groups to support their interests. They positioned their agents in key roles within new administration. By the time the transition completed, they had actually increased their penetration rather than decreased it. Our military coup eliminated this advantage completely. The 6-hour takeover gave them no time to adapt. They woke up to find their agents arrested, their equipment seized, and their networks destroyed. The speed was devastating to their operations in ways that slow democratic transitions could never achieve. The completeness of military purges was the second essential advantage. We removed every single official with Western intelligence connections. We didn't negotiate about who could stay. We didn't compromise about which positions they could keep. We didn't accept arguments about their value or expertise. We eliminated everyone we identified as compromised, regardless of their rank or role. Democratic transitions never achieved this completeness because they required power sharing and compromise. Opposition groups that won elections had to include some officials from previous government to maintain stability. They had to negotiate with established bureaucrats to keep services running. They had to compromise with military officers to prevent resistance. These necessities meant that Western agents always survived transitions by moving to different positions or joining new coalitions. I calculated that democratic transitions removed average 38% of compromised officials. Military coups removed average 94%. The difference was enormous and decisive. Removing 38% meant Western networks remained operational with reduced capacity. Removing 94% meant Western networks were completely destroyed and had to be rebuilt from scratch. The unity of military command was the third crucial advantage. Our government had one leader, one chain of command, one set of orders. Every soldier and officer knew exactly who they reported to and what they were supposed to do. There were no competing factions arguing about policy. There were no divided loyalties pulling in different directions. There was unified purpose focused on achieving sovereignty. Democratic governments were inherently divided into multiple parties, factions, and interest groups. These divisions created constant internal conflicts about priorities and policies. Western intelligence exploited these divisions brilliantly by supporting certain factions against others. They would fund opposition groups to block policies they opposed. They would amplify disagreements to paralyze decision-making. They would use divisions to ensure democratic governments remained weak and controllable. Military unity eliminated these exploitation opportunities completely. Western intelligence couldn't fund opposition factions within unified command structure. They couldn't amplify divisions that didn't exist. They couldn't paralyze governments that made decisions through clear hierarchy rather than endless debate. The unity made us strong in ways that democratic divisions made other governments weak. I observed this difference practically when Western powers tried to pressure us. They would threaten sanctions, hoping different factions would argue about whether to compromise. But we had no factions. I made the decision to reject their threats. Officers implemented my decision. Soldiers executed the orders. There was no debate, no division, no opportunity for Western manipulation. Democratic governments facing similar pressure would have fractured immediately. Some factions would argue for compromise to avoid sanctions. Other factions would demand resistance to maintain sovereignty. The resulting paralysis would force eventual surrender to Western demands. The divisions guaranteed that democratic governments ultimately submitted to pressure, that military governments resisted successfully. The determination of military governments was the fourth vital advantage. Soldiers were trained to fight and die for their country. We understood that achieving sovereignty required sacrifice and struggle. We were mentally prepared to endure hardship, resist pressure, and maintain our position regardless of Western threats. This determination came from military culture that valued duty, honor, and national service above personal comfort or wealth. Democratic politicians typically lacked this determination because they were motivated by different values. They entered politics to gain power, wealth, and status. They wanted comfortable lives and international respect. They feared sanctions that would hurt their business interests. They craved Western approval that validated their importance. These motivations made them vulnerable to pressure and willing to compromise sovereignty for personal benefit. I saw this difference clearly in how officials responded to Western threats. When France threatened sanctions, our military officers asked how we would fight back. When America warned of isolation, our commanders discussed alternative partnerships. When Western media attacked us, our soldiers ignored the propaganda. The military mindset was confrontational and determined rather than accommodating and fearful. Democratic politicians in neighboring countries responded completely differently to identical threats. They panicked about sanctions. They worried about isolation. They obsessed over media criticism. They ultimately compromised their positions to reduce pressure. Their lack of determination guaranteed they would surrender sovereignty whenever Western powers applied sufficient pressure. The determination also manifested in willingness to endure hardship. Our military government accepted that achieving sovereignty would require sacrifice. We knew Western sanctions would hurt our economy temporarily. We understood that breaking from their systems would create short-term difficulties. We were prepared to suffer these costs because we valued long-term independence over short-term comfort. Democratic governments rarely accepted such hardship because politicians feared losing popularity and power. If sanctions hurt the economy, opposition parties would criticize the government. If breaking from Western systems created difficulties, voters might elect different leaders. The political pressures forced democratic governments to prioritize short-term stability over long-term sovereignty. I made the opposite calculation deliberately. I accepted that our first years of independence would be economically difficult. I knew that building alternative partnerships would take time. I understood that escaping Western control required enduring their punishment. But I was determined to pay these short-term costs to achieve permanent sovereignty. Military culture gave me the determination that democratic politicians lacked. Democracy made sovereignty impossible by preserving the divisions, delays, and foreign penetration that maintained Western control. Every feature of democratic systems that Western powers praised as virtues were actually mechanisms for maintaining their dominance. They praised democracy's slowness as deliberation and careful decision-making. Actually, the slowness gave them time to manipulate outcomes. They celebrated democracy's divisions as pluralism and diverse voices. Actually, the divisions allowed them to exploit conflicts. They defended democracy's openness as transparency and accountability. Actually, the openness enabled their penetration and surveillance. Every supposed virtue of democracy was actually a vulnerability that Western intelligence exploited. The system was designed to maintain their control while appearing to give us freedom. The elections were mechanisms for installing their agents. The institutions were structures they penetrated. The procedures were delays that prevented decisive action. The entire system was trap disguised as liberation. I studied this trap carefully and understood it completely. Democracy was not universal system suitable for all countries. It was specific system designed by Western powers to maintain control over countries they no longer directly colonized. It worked perfectly for their purposes by creating governments that appeared independent but were actually controlled through intelligence networks, economic pressure, and political manipulation. Military rule escaped this trap by rejecting the entire democratic framework. We didn't try to reform democracy or improve elections. We abandoned the system completely and built different structure based on military hierarchy, unified command, and national service. This alternative system was immune to the manipulation techniques that made democratic governments controllable. The difference between military coups and democratic transitions is total and fundamental. One destroys foreign control, the other preserves it. One creates sovereignty, the other maintains colonialism. One serves African people, the other serves Western intelligence. These differences are not matters of degree or emphasis. They are absolute and categorical. Military coups and democratic transitions produce completely opposite outcomes. There is no middle ground. There is no hybrid approach. The choice is binary, either military action that destroys foreign control or democratic process that preserves it. I proved this through our experience and through studying other African countries. Every successful achievement of sovereignty happened through military action. Every failure to achieve sovereignty happened through democratic process. The pattern was perfect and undeniable. Military coups worked, democratic transitions failed. The historical record was completely clear.